Hey YouTube! So recently, Zak George has put out a new video talking about some concerns that he has about the dog training industry. And I've seen some other really well-respected trainers put out some similar sort of content in the past few weeks. But I just wanted to watch through this video and sort of add to the conversation, share my thoughts, share my disagreements, and also share some of the science because, yeah, that's sort of my thing. So let's get into it.
This is an ultra-sensitive topic that affects everyone in our community. I especially want to be respectful to people who train differently than I do throughout this video. As a dog trainer, I am deeply concerned about the future of our industry, given what I'm seeing on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I seriously mean this. I genuinely want this to be a good faith discussion. And I'm going to be presenting some questions throughout this video that I have a genuine interest in hearing your response to.
It's really great that he's starting this open, honest, and hopefully non-judgmental conversation. I started training in a way that I would never do now because I've learned that there's better methods and more effective methods. I'm deliberately not on TikTok because I've heard that that's quite a scary place for dog trainers to be. But I do think that we have the most amazing opportunity at the moment, and it's a really amazing time that we live in, as cliche as that sounds. And I think that so long as the effectiveness of newer training methods can actually get disseminated far and wide, and particularly the general public can see how well it works. And I think that once people actually see for themselves that done right, positive training works really, really well, and they don't want to hurt their dog, they can see that they can have both. I do think that things will go that way naturally. So are we in a state of emergency or crisis? I don't know. Some dogs are, but let's see how this goes.
So today we're going to go over aversive dog training methods. There is a wide spectrum of using aversives in dog training. It can be as simple as saying, no, you can't have that treat. Or on the more extreme end, practically as we see it in dog training sometimes, it can be a more heavy-handed approach with a choke chain or a prong collar and swift, harsh corrections being delivered at optimal moments.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that quite a lot of people don't realize. There literally is no such thing as only positive or purely positive training. The withdrawal of the opportunity for reinforcement is by nature aversive. That's what guides the animal's behavior to the outcome that we're after. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that if you've got an unwanted behavior, you actually don't need to create a seriously aversive event. So long as there's some level of disappointment, behavior is going to gravitate to what is the most rewarding, whilst we can't ever completely remove aversives from an animal's life. It is processed in a very different way to, say, something that causes pain or something that makes the animal afraid. They are very, very different brain circuits, and that information is processed differently. But any time that the expected event doesn't happen and something less happens, that is some level of disappointment that can be classed as aversive stimulation. So yeah, the somewhat offensive label of purely positive does not exist.
Dog trainers watching this, we're all dog trainers. We all got into this because we love dogs. At no point am I ever questioning your love and dedication to making dogs' lives better. I know that we all come at it from that perspective.
I really love that. Seeing an animal in pain or experiencing fear, especially when it is not necessary and can easily be avoided, I understand that that's really painful to watch. But one of the reasons that we elect not to use positive punishment and aversives in our training is because we know that there's other more effective ways to change behavior. I would love to see, particularly the positive reinforcement training community, adopt that with fellow human learners. And I come at this entire discussion from what I think is a unique perspective. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household where my dad preached that if you got a dog, you have to take them to training. There are no ifs, buts, maybes about it. You get a dog, you take them to training. That was just part of being a responsible guardian. And where I grew up in the 90s, all dogs were on choke chains. They didn't attend training before they were about 6 months old. And so by that stage, many of the dogs had already developed a lot of behaviors that were undesirable. And so as a junior handler, I learned that to make a dog sit, you pull the choke chain up and the butt hits the ground, and then you say, good dog. And to make them stay, you stick your hand in their face and say, stay. If they pull on lead, then you check the chain. If they bark, then you check the chain. If they do anything you don't like, you check the chain. And we were told, because we had German Shepherds who are strong, powerful, high drive dogs, these methods are necessary. I remember as a child, I once asked, why are they walking their dog on a flat collar and we use a chain? And I was told that it's because German Shepherds are so strong, we needed that security, and it would be dangerous for them to be walked on equipment that was not quite so strong. And as a child, I'm like, yeah, cool, okay, I didn't question it. And I vividly remember when my dad started training his German Shepherd with hot dogs, I thought it was absurd. I thought it was the silliest thing that I had ever heard of. But you know what? That German Shepherd had the best recall of all our dogs. I wonder why that was. When you don't know, you don't know. But hopefully when we know better, we can do better.
The question I have is it ever necessary to use punishment, particularly physical punishment, as part of a behavior modification or training plan, even with extreme cases like aggressive behavior? And if so, what is the scientific data to support that claim? Have to break up the fight by grabbing them and separating the dogs in a very assertive way that the dogs could view as unpleasant, but it's necessary in that moment. That's not what I'm talking about. But never would a dog trainer, I hope not anyway, assume, oh, that's how I train a dog not to fight. And I'm not saying they do say that. I'm trying to explain that it really comes down to using intentional aversives as part of a behavior modification plan to get a dog to behave as we wish them to be, or as a training program. Is that distinction clear?
And it's important to recognize that things like defensive handling, so if you are dealing with a real risk of a dog aggressing and harm may come to you or another being, then again, we're going to use the least intrusive, minimally aversive strategy to prevent harm from occurring. And just as an aside, Zak talks about running in there and grabbing a dog and pulling them out. If two dogs are having a fight and there's lots of teeth there, it's not a good idea to go and stick your hands in. Again, I'm going to put a link in the description below of some information that might be helpful for you. But yeah, what Zak's getting at is the fact that we're not talking about force-free training in the sense of when disaster happens, I'm going to use the method that is necessary to keep people safe and the dogs safe. But when that does happen, what we then need to do is pedal back and go, where did I screw up? Where did I screw up in the antecedent arrangement? So in my management, where did my management fail? These things don't happen out of nowhere. What was the sequence of events that led up to that? And how could we have prevented the triggers from actually occurring? That is a different thing entirely to a behavior change plan.
Trainers do, whether they use aversives or not in their dog training, is they take a step back, they develop a plan of how to address this issue. Ideally, that plan should be a medium to long-term goal because it's a complex issue, and give their client the appropriate advice about how to systematically desensitize, how to counter condition, and how to get that dog on the path. This actually is.
And what's really important that Zak hasn't said is there's been some research done that from memory, it was about 80% of dogs who were exhibiting aggression in this particular study, and this is out of hundreds of dogs, 80% of those dogs had some underlying pain or medical condition. So we as trainers could train as fluently as we possibly can. If the issue is pain, if the issue is a medical one, we're not going to get to the heart of the issue.
But I do want to remind everyone that when we're having discussions like this, the burden of proof lies on the party that's making the claim. In this case, it would be dog trainers who are saying that sometimes aversive methods are necessary.
Yeah, I love that he said that. That is just the nature of science. I am a scientist, so I feel that I can contribute to this part of the conversation. If you are making a claim that something is necessary, X is necessary for Y, the onus is on you to provide evidence to support that claim.
There is what can only be described as a major disconnect with how the scientific community looks at animal behavior and dog behavior, and what dog trainers are teaching the public about dog behavior.
And I think I need to interject here because I came from a psychology background. I have an accredited major in psychology. I have a PhD in both psychology and biology, and I lecture at a group of 8 university in psychology. So I feel that I have something to contribute to this part of the conversation. Unfortunately, when it comes to science-based training, if we're only looking at psychology studies, you're only getting part of the picture. A dog living as a companion animal in a human household is very different to a rat in a box. If a rat is exhibiting a behavior and that behavior is punished with electric shocks, then the result is the frequency of the behavior decreases. End of. The issue comes when we take that information and then apply it to companion animals, because the dependent variable that was actually being measured with the rat in the box is the target behavior only. If we're not measuring things like welfare, we're not going to find any information because we're not looking for it. And quite literally, through my entire university career, I was not exposed to things like the fallouts of punishment. It's just not talked about. And so when we're talking about what is the scientific evidence, what are scientists telling us, you need to actually look at scientists who are studying dogs, and in particular, companion dogs. Because most of the dogs on planet Earth are free-roaming village dogs. They are not owned by anybody. And their entire way of living is very, very different to the circumstances that a companion dog is exposed to, subjected to. We need to be comparing apples with apples here.
Broadly speaking, I think we agree there's a couple of ways that people attempt to train their dogs. They'll use treats to let them know when they've done something right, and they might use corrections or punishments to communicate to the dog, you've done something that I don't like. And to be clear, dog trainers refer to corrections like this, even subtle ones, like taking a treat away from a dog when you're encouraging them to sit and they don't do it. We refer to those things as punishments, things that are viewed as unpleasant.
Kind of punishment is any consequence that reduces the frequency of a behavior. Say I'm holding a treat and a dog is jumping up and I take the treat away. If taking a treat away stops the dog jumping up, then that consequence has punished the behavior of jumping up. The type of punishment we're more familiar with is what's called positive punishment or added punishment, where an intervention is being added to the situation, like saying or no, or things like spraying water on the dog. There is aversive stimulation being added to the situation, and that consequence decreases how often the dog jumps up. That's called positive punishment, whereas taking the treat away, a bit like a timeout, that's called negative punishment. I'm going to take away this privilege to stop you doing the behavior I don't like. So when I'm talking about punishment, I'm just talking about an intervention that decreases the future frequency of a behavior.
And as we discussed before, wide variance in the use of various types of punishment in dog training. Saying you can't have a piece of chicken to a dog probably isn't viewed as aversive to a dog as using an electric collar in a situation that causes them discomfort.
Yes, exactly. And what's really important to point out is it is the learner who decides how aversive that stimulation is. The question inevitably comes up, well, is it okay to say no to a dog? Quite often, dogs are so resilient that you say no and nothing changes, which means that no was not actually acting as punishment. No was completely pointless. So why don't we use a strategy that works instead? But if that word does stop that behavior from happening, and then the dog's put in the same situation and they don't do that behavior again, what that means is that that particular dog found that situation so unpleasant that they determined it was not worth the risk. And so where we might be like, it's just no, or it's just water, I'm just going to spray them, we might fob that off. But if it actually produces behavioral change, that is telling us that it wasn't nothing for the dog. That was significant. And if an animal is being exposed repeatedly to significantly aversive events, and that's happening on a regularly occurring basis, that can actually change how that dog perceives different events in the world. When they are exposed to something new, they are more likely to interpret that situation as bad or threatening. We know that frequent aversive stimulation decreases things like exploratory behavior. Essentially think of it as, well, if I know that there's a lot of risk in the world, then I shouldn't do anything. And this doesn't necessarily look like a shutdown animal. It can look like neutral good behavior, but when you then give the animal something like an enrichment activity, they don't know what to do with it, because trying new and different behaviors has frequently resulted in aversive outcomes. Even if that aversive outcome was someone going,
Virtually all dog trainers agree that rewards are fantastic and productive for dog training, regardless of their disciplines. In learning theory, the principles that govern how all animals learn, punishments and aversion, are actually never required. There is no known instance in the animal kingdom where using physical punishment is required to create new behavior or to stop unwanted behavior.
Two things here. So two things that he's talking about. Firstly, this is scientific fact. The only way to build new behavior is via reinforcement. You cannot punish your way to new behavior. That is biological fact. And what he's getting at by saying there is no known instance of needing to use aversive stimulation in order to decrease the frequency of an unwanted behavior, what he's talking about is a strategy called differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior. Essentially, the way that the brain works, imagine it like a tree of different decisions. So I could sit, I could jump up, I could bark, I could paw, I could lie down. In each situation, the brain calculates which of these outcomes is most likely to lead to reward. And I use that term specifically. The brain codes reward. Whether that also acts as reinforcement is a different story. So in neuroscience, we use the term reward very deliberately. And so the brain works out which of these options is most likely to get me paid. It is very, very natural for a dog to select, say, the jumping up option. I jump up, I get. That's sort of what's been pre-programmed in their brain. But in order to stop jumping up, you do not need to add aversive stimulation to that situation and suppress it. What you can do instead is think, well, which of the other behavior options would I prefer? Let's make that one more valuable. Let's prevent this one from happening until this behavior, this preferred behavior, has had enough reinforcement history that the dog looks at all their options and goes, I'm not going to do that one, I'm going to sit, because I know that one most reliably gets me a good outcome. And so, yeah, for teaching life skills, there is absolutely no need, there is no requirement to use corrections. Differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors and management to prevent the unwanted behavior while we're developing reinforcement history, that is not only extremely effective, it's also very fast. It's not like this takes forever.
This actually isn't even controversial, but virtually all behavior science where physical punishment is used virtually always concludes that there are long-term welfare concerns.
Please know that he is not saying that every single dog who experiences some form of aversive stimulation will have behavioral fallout. That is not the argument. What he is saying is that when behavioral scientists have looked at the result of using aversive tools in training and behavior modification programs, those studies have found that on average, the overall welfare of that animal decreases. And I suppose a good way to think about this is you may know of a person who has lived through truly awful circumstances, yet still they have a wonderful, bright outlook on life. Some dogs are similar. Some dogs are so resilient that even the routine use of aversives may not show any outward signs of decreased welfare. But does that give us free rein to go and use aversives on that animal? I would argue no, because we know that there are equally effective methods. And note that if we're talking about a resilient animal, that animal is highly unlikely to be showing aggressive behaviors. The overwhelming majority of aggression cases are underpinned by fear and anxiety.
Now, two of the studies in dog training that are often referenced were both done in 2017, and they're both comprehensive reviews, studies of studies, so to speak. And the purpose of these studies was to try to get an overall consensus as to really how your dogs at home should be trained and advised by professional dog trainers. But the results of both of these compilations of studies suggest that aversive methods are correlated with stress behaviors, elevated cortisol levels, and this is an important one, fear and aggression within dogs.
I love the detail that Zak goes into talking about the research here. I'm not going to play all of this because of time and also copyright issues. If you want to see the actual video, check the link in the description below. But essentially, when we look at the research as a whole, we see that the use of aversives in dog training, it increases stress, it can increase anxiety, and it can actually exacerbate fear and aggression. Now, why is this? So one of the big issues with using aversive tools to suppress aggressive behaviors is that it doesn't take into consideration the emotional cause of that aggression. Why is the dog behaving like this in the first place? A really great way to think about this is using the canine ladder of aggression. Essentially, dogs and all beings are going to show different types of behaviors depending on how stressed they are. If you've ever heard of the fight, flight, freeze response, this is where those behaviors fall. So you'll see at the bottom of the ladder, if a dog is exposed to a stressor, one of the first things that they're likely to do is low-level behaviors, things like licking their nose, looking away, blinking rapidly. Stress yawns are also pretty common, and we wouldn't consider these behaviors aggressive. However, they are signs that the animal is uncomfortable. And because these behaviors are frequently missed by guardians, the dog learns that even though I'm doing these behaviors, it's not making the unpleasant situation stop. What that does is extinguishes that behavior in that situation. The dog learns that there's no point doing that behavior because no one's listening anyway. It doesn't make the bad stuff stop, but it also doesn't change how the dog feels inside. They're still uncomfortable and they still want to make the bad thing go away. So they're going to move up the ladder a bit. They might turn their whole body. They might walk away. They might do behaviors like lift a paw. That's a sign of increasing physiological arousal. The dog might engage in flight behaviors, things like getting low to the ground and creeping away. They might do behaviors like completely lie down or roll on their back. Again, if those behaviors don't work to make that cause of their discomfort go away, or if fleeing the situation has been prevented by things like maybe the animal's cornered, maybe they're on lead, then again, the dog's brain is going to determine that these behaviors are ineffective. It doesn't change how they feel inside. The underlying motivation is still there. So what is the only thing they can do? They need to escalate up that ladder of aggression again. If we're talking the fight, flight, freeze response, this is where we start seeing those fight behaviors. Things like growling, snapping, snarling, biting. And this is where things can get really, really dangerous if aversive tools are used, because just like the behaviors lower on the ladder of aggression, if we teach the dog that growling doesn't make the bad thing go away, then we are left with a very distressed dog who is not going to give us early warning signs that they're distressed. And there is scientific research documenting that when these behaviors have been punished, increases their propensity for aggression. Where a dog has been punished for growling, it can be a very risky and volatile situation.
Dogs who were trained using aversive techniques were more likely to be the perpetrator in dog-to-dog interactions. Now, in the case of this,
yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. If we think about a dog who has had all of their lower rungs of the aggression ladder burnt off, if they get even a little bit distressed, that can make them jump up to a higher level of aggression.
the study also took a look at the efficacy of bar collars, shock collars, and electric fences. Results suggest that using those tools might be painful or frightening to some dogs, as well as having negative effects between a dog and their handler, their overall welfare, and their training performance.
Yeah, absolutely. It might interest you to know that there is now a class action against one of the big shock collar producers because these products have been marketed as safe and the data suggests otherwise, and the manufacturer is aware of that.
Because there's a divide amongst us dog trainers in terms of training philosophies, the public is left with this idea that there is not consensus with how we should approach dog training, even though there actually is a scientific consensus. It seems that one of the things we've got to overcome is people trusting their instincts to train their dog. I can understand that, right? Not everyone's going to be like, oh, let me go brush up on the latest science of dog training because I got a new puppy. I get it.
Yeah, it's unreasonable to expect that when someone gets a new puppy, that they suddenly need to become a professional animal trainer. No, that is not a reasonable expectation. But it would also be a false dichotomy to argue that because that situation exists, then you must use aversive tools. That's not true. That's one of the reasons I love games-based training. We use simple games that set up the situation so the dog is practicing success. We train for the situation, not in the situation, so the dog is not rehearsing and getting reinforced for the unwanted behaviors. And then as that dog's skills increase, we can start to increase the challenge again. Essentially, games-based training is a whole lot of shaping, but without the mechanical difficulty that we usually think of with shaping.
An article in Society and Animals looked at how dogs are viewed in dog training culture in Finland. And so this study found a difference between what they call dog-centered and human-centered dog training approaches. So if you were a dog-centered trainer, that meant that you approach dog training as more of an equal partnership where you shared power. You allow the dog to make mistakes with the aim of reinforcing when they do what you like and then build from there. So in contrast to that, human-centered dog trainers viewed the relationship not so much as a partnership, but more hierarchical.
And this doesn't just relate to dominance theory, which has been repeatedly debunked. When there is a view that dogs must do what we tell them to, you can understand why that mentality would increase the propensity to use aversive tools. And again, this does not mean that if we take a dog-centered approach of, well, what are the dog's underlying needs and how do we address those needs? That does not mean that those dogs are out of control and then they're going to end up in shelters or get euthanized. That is not what the data says. If that argument is being put forward, it is a false dichotomy. In fact, the better that we meet our dog's needs, the fewer behavioral issues there are. There's a really great book, Canine Enrichment for the Real World. It addresses just this issue. I'll link it below.
As they brainstorm and mistakes are tolerated and then successes are rewarded.
Yeah, exactly. And when we're talking about mistakes are tolerated, if we set up the environment so mistakes are never catastrophic, then it is fine for the dog to make these errors and learn the consequences of their actions, in the sense that if I do X, I do not get a good outcome. If I do Y, I do get a good outcome. The brain then ensures that in this particular situation, behavior Y is selected because it is more valuable. That is the neuroscience of how the brain works. There is no question about that. If we're in a situation where the dog is performing unwanted behaviors repeatedly, then the environment needs to be changed such that those behaviors are not being evoked. This is why we train for the situation, not in the situation.
Speaking very broadly here, and there will be exceptions to this, many trainers who implement aversives in their training expect a dog to obey a command immediately. And if the dog doesn't comply, then they're either punished until they do the behavior, or the handler may physically assist them in making the behavior happen in some way.
If a dog has been given a cue to do a behavior and they do not do that behavior, and then some form of aversive stimulation is applied, that's not punishment, that would be negative reinforcement. Because remember, by definition, punishment decreases the frequency of a behavior. What the goal there would be is actually increasing the frequency of the cued behavior. There are huge problems with using both positive and negative reinforcement with the same cue. I will do my best to simplify the neuroscience here. When a cue has been trained with positive reinforcement, what the brain encodes is that when I perceive this cue, if I do this behavior, there is a high probability of reward. In that situation, the behavior is being driven by the approach motivation system. On the flip side, if there is a where a cue is given, and if the behavior is not performed, then aversive stimulation is going to be applied until the behavior is performed. In that situation, the behavior is being driven by the avoidance motivation system. The problem is the approach motivation system and the avoidance motivation system counteract each other. You can think of it a bit like a seesaw. Both sides can't go up at the same time. So in these do it or else situations, a few different things can happen. What can happen is the behavior just completely falls apart. The animal realizes that there is a potential threat, and that induces freezing. So the dog hears the word sit and they freeze. That's because the aversive outcome has been associated with the cue. Now, in order to overcome that freezing, the animal needs to go from a state of passive avoidance to active avoidance. That is a really difficult thing for a lot of animals to do. There was a study done in rats, and about half of the animals could not transition from a state of passive avoidance to active avoidance. Those animals showed essentially a state of learned helplessness. They didn't attempt to avoid the aversive stimulation because their brain had coded that it wasn't avoidable anyway. Now, for the animals who did learn to engage in active avoidance, yeah, they might get the cookie at the end, but that cookie is not the motivator in that situation. In fact, giving that cookie afterwards can actually make the learning worse, because again, we're starting to muck up that approach avoidance seesaw. And again, the data demonstrates that animals trained in this way do not in fact have higher compliance. Positive reinforcement methods produce equally good, if not better, results. The other issue with these do it or else sort of situations, the individual's brain does not necessarily learn that it was their lack of action that caused the aversive stimulation. These would be those animals that end up developing learned helplessness because they're perceiving the situation as, I am experiencing inescapable, unpredictable aversive stimulation. It is much easier for a dog to learn, do not do this behavior or else, rather than do this behavior or else. Do it or else is a much more difficult contingency to learn, and it is exponentially more difficult than do this, get a good outcome. If then rules are much easier to learn. And there are so many reasons why an animal would not perform a certain behavior when a certain cue is given. Dogs are not stubborn. They either don't have sufficient motivation to do the behavior, and then that's on us to create enough appetitive motivation. They may not have perceived the cue. If we're putting dogs in situations where there's 50 other dogs in the training class, how can we blame the dog for getting distracted? That would be like trying to teach someone calculus at a rock concert. If the person gets the maths equation wrong or doesn't hear the question, is that their fault? Should they then be subjected to aversive stimulation because they didn't do as they were told? In my opinion, that is really unfair. There can be things like pain, discomfort, and even lack of confirmation to the breed standard, or confirmation to the breed standard, that makes it uncomfortable for the dog to actually do the behavior that is being required of them. We don't need to use do it or else strategies to get reliable behavior. That claim is inaccurate.
So when you look at both of these approaches, look how the power dynamic is distributed. In one case, you have a partnership, and in another case, you have I'm a human, the dog is here to serve me type attitude.
Yeah, and that mentality came from the German army of all places. A lot of the early information that was disseminated about dog training came from military trainers, where there is a strict hierarchy, just as we're all a product of our environment. Is it any wonder that this interpretation was made? And yeah, although there is a dependent relationship, our dogs are literally dependent on us for everything. That does not mean that there is a hierarchical relationship. And it also doesn't mean that viewing it as a relationship translates to the dog being unruly. That is a slippery slope argument. It's a logical fallacy.
You have to really pay a lot of attention to a dog's body language and how they're behaving in a certain context, their emotional state, and what it really takes to set up that individual dog to succeed. I can see how that...
And really, I actually would disagree with it, because games-based training is easy. And also dealing with the fallout of aversives is harder in the long run. I do not accept that aversive methods are easier.
We actually have a strong precedent of how punishment affects human behavior in our culture already, and that is well studied. We also have the understanding that mammals of all kinds have been shown to learn and process emotions in similar ways. In light of that, the position statement of the American Psychological Association on corporal punishment in children is pretty clear. Scientific evidence demonstrates that physical discipline of children by parents and other caregivers can harm children's mental health and possibly increase their propensity toward aggressive behavior. Research indicates that physical discipline is not effective in achieving a parent's long-term goals of decreasing aggressive and defiant behavior in children, or of promoting regulated and socially competent behavior in children.
And what's really interesting is that there will always be people who are like, well, dogs are not children. And no, like, duh, dogs are not children. However, their understanding of the world is similar to that of a 2-year-old child. Are we about to use corporal punishment on a 2-year-old child? Would we use the equivalent of a choke chain, prong collar, or electric collar on a 2-year-old child? Would we spray a 2-year-old child in the face with water when they cry? Because of the perceived intelligence of dogs, it can be tempting to put more responsibility on them. You know better, you're responsible for your actions. We would never say that to a 2-year-old child.
One study found 10 negative outcomes for corporal punishment in children, but one benefit. One benefit was immediate compliance. Isn't this what we often see when aversives are used in training? Immediate compliance.
Yes. You can see how reinforcing it is for the human. I got what I wanted immediately, therefore I will do it again in the future. And I think the deeper question is that ethical? If it takes a bit longer and requires a little bit more skill, is that reason enough to use punishment instead? Is us being rubbish at training the dog's fault? Let's continue.
But you know what else we're seeing is the likelihood of up to 10 other potential outcomes as a result of that compulsion. The negative outcomes of punishment in children included aggression, reduced mental health, increased criminal or antisocial behavior, and a reduced quality of relationship with the parents.
And it's really interesting because I've seen firsthand with some trainers who do use choke chains prong collars, shock collars. The dependent variable that they're measuring is my dog walking on a loose lead. Yes. Although that behavior might be going the way that they wanted, what they're not seeing is those behaviors that we looked at on the canine aggression ladder. Things like averted gaze, lip licking, stress yawns. Just because a dog may not be crouched down with his ears pinned back does not mean that that dog is not suffering adverse stress and unnecessary stress. That again has been documented in scientific literature with dogs on prong and electric collars. I recall vividly when a highly qualified, highly experienced balance trainer had her toy poodle on a prong collar and she was doing some sort of physical manipulation with it, and the dog was immediately compliant with every position that they were manipulated into. But she didn't recognize that this dog was experiencing learned helplessness. When we're not looking for those signs of stress, we don't see them, just as in the rat literature that I was trained with. We need to look beyond the one dependent variable.
These are very similar to the dog training results that we talked about earlier. I mean, some of us might remember a time when corporal punishment in schools and at home was a hotly debated topic in society. But these days, and tell me if you agree with this, we've seen a dramatic shift to positive reinforcement in parenting culture. And that's because we understand that it's been shown to be more effective and that those side effects are very real and not worth the risks.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that this is a tangent, but I used to be a youth worker, and in the programs with youth where they were committing crime, sometimes violent crime, where those kids are simply punished or locked up or whatever, reoffending is huge. But where an intervention program actually gets to the heart of why are they committing this crime in the first place? Why is the behavior occurring in the first place? What is the underlying motivation? Those programs consistently make meaningful change.
Okay, if we are collectively able to acknowledge that there's no known instance where physical aversion is necessary in order to modify behavior or teach new behavior in humans or any other animal, what justification do we as professionals have making it part of a regular training regimen? That is the question. Even if you think that the science is way too flawed in the dog field, way too flawed in learning theory, the burden of proof to support your case lies with the person making the claim. In this case, the person who says that aversives are necessary sometimes in dog training. And if one feels that way, they must then show the scientific data that supports that hypothesis. And I'm not trying to be nitpicky here, but remember, dog training by its very nature is a scientific profession. We are the ones trusted with getting living beings to behave differently than they do right now.
I think it's interesting to note something that Bob Bailey has reported. So Bob Bailey is a very famous animal trainer, has trained probably more species on the planet than any other person. And he's routinely worked with agencies like the military to help train their animals. He's reported that even in those settings, the occasions that they've used positive punishment to ensure that that animal is not going to put themselves or others in harm's way is exceptionally rare. And we're talking about situations where animals are going into areas where there could be explosives. These animals have to be highly trained and virtually cannot make mistakes because those mistakes could be lethal, not just for the animal, but also for people around them. And even in those circumstances, the use of positive punishment is either unwarranted or so rare that we can say it's unnecessary. We're talking about possibly a handful of cases in an entire career. And if that's the case, we should not be seeing the use of positive punishment so commonly, especially with pet dogs. And so, yeah, in cases where someone like Bob Bailey has used positive punishment with a dog who's doing bomb detection, am I going to jump up and down and say you were wrong? No, I'm not. I was not there. I was not involved in that training process. If those people who are really well versed in positive reinforcement training and differentially reinforcing alternative behaviors, if they have deemed that in a particular case that positive punishment was necessary, I am of course willing to hear that case. But I suppose that also begs the question of where there are situations that necessitate the use of pain, fear, and discomfort. Is it ethical for us to require animals to be subjected to those circumstances? Many would campaign against the use of animals in testing cosmetics because of the understanding that that product is unnecessary. Do those same questions carry over to working dogs? If pain, fear, or discomfort is required in order for them to effectively do their job, is it ethical for them to be put in that situation in the first place? I don't have the answer to this. These are ethical questions that as a society we need to work through. But I would love to hear from professionals, especially those who are well-versed in positive reinforcement training, who deal with things like aggression cases routinely. How often do you find that you may be considering using aversive techniques? Is it as frequently as social media may have the public to believe? If you work these kind of cases on a day in, day out basis without the use of aversives, please let me know in the comments. So one of the models that I use in my practice to help guide what type of interventions I'm going to use in different circumstances is James O'Hare's least intrusive effective behavior intervention algorithm. This algorithm is informed by what we know about certain types of stimulation and what is going to promote animal welfare, but also what is going to effectively change behavior when that is necessary. And he actually copped a lot of flack when he brought out this model because he did include not just things like, okay, I'm going to do a functional assessment. I'm going to find out why is this behavior actually happening. We know that reinforcement maintains behavior. So what reinforcers are actually at play? How do we stop those reinforcers to prevent the behavior from happening in the future? How can we teach and reinforce alternative behaviors that are more constructive to the conversation that's happening between the dog and the situation, and that's going to improve the welfare of all beings in that situation? The most relevant part of the algorithm comes down here. Does failure create an unmanageable and unacceptable safety risk? So in a situation where, say, a chihuahua is jumping up on somebody because they're excited, that behavior could be annoying, but it doesn't pose an unmanageable and unacceptable safety risk. So say the person, for whatever reason, is unable to stick with the training plan and they're unable to create behavior change. In that sort of situation, I do not believe it is ethical to use aversive stimulation on that animal because the behavior does not create an unmanageable, unacceptable safety risk. The failure really is in the human not following the training plan. And so I don't feel that in that situation it is ethical to apply aversive stimulation. If the behavior does create an unmanageable and unacceptable safety risk, and I have and do work these cases myself, then I look at things like consulting with colleagues, looking at referring on to someone like a veterinary behaviorist. And it's so funny because I've seen in the comments of Zak George's video, people saying, oh, you refer them on to a behaviorist, and then they say we just euthanize them or drug them to the hills. Clearly you're working with the wrong vet behaviorist because that's not been my experience at all. And for those people, I will provide some links in the description below of people who you may wish to refer to. Where I've got an aggression case and the training is not going to plan, our first port of call is actually to reevaluate the entire situation. What triggers did we miss? What else is going on in the animal's life? We need to start from the ground up and reevaluate the case because behavioral science is science. It's not guesswork. All mammals learn in the same basic way. The wiring of the mammalian brain is pretty much conserved, at least when it comes to associative learning. And so for me, if I end up at level 6, I'm referring on to a certified dog behavior consultant, and I will put some links in the description below. I'm referring on to a vet behaviorist, and again, I'll put some links in the description below. I'm going to be referring to people who I know regularly work aggression cases and have demonstrated success in that area. I am not going to be referring on to people who maybe do this occasionally. I want to say that they've worked with animals with a bite history, possibly several bites, and they've got good results without using aversion. But one of the things that James O'Hare copped quite a bit of backlash, particularly from the positive reinforcement community, about is this level 7 box. And this is where he's suggesting that if we have actually done our job properly and we have supervised the guardian and seen, yeah, they are actually implementing the training plan properly, and for whatever reason, change is still not occurring, and we've referred on and we've consulted with people who do this all the time, if we're still not making progress and there is an unmanageable and unacceptable safety risk, that person would be developing a plan using the least aversive option to quickly and effectively suppress that behavior as humanely as possible, while simultaneously building and reinforcing the alternative behavior that we want to see. They would then bridge the gap between those two situations and rehabilitate any emotional fallout that happened as a result of that aversive stimulation. James O'Hare has said that if we get to box 7, we have failed. You should never get there. If you want to take a look at the algorithm yourself, I'll pop a link in the description below. So what are your thoughts on the matter? If you're a trainer, how did you start out? Did you start out similar to me, using aversive tools? What was the situation that made you consider perhaps this isn't the best way and maybe I should go and pursue other methods? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Pop them in the comments below. I highly encourage you to not only check out the links that I've left in the description below for further education, but also to check out the original video where you'll see the full discussion. You can see that here.